Good morning for you guys. Good evening for me. It's just ticked over midnight 15 minutes ago for me. So I'm sitting here in Perth, Western Australia, representing Curtin University and representing the mayoral team of the Connecting Work and Education group from Shaping EDU. Great to see you all on board. I sat in briefly on part of the previous session, and I can see that we've got a lot of overlaps and connections with the work that was discussed around the flagpole earlier on. So I've had a very busy day. I've had a showcase of student work to a group of dignitaries from the education department, from industry, from other sectors, where we've had students solving or attempting to solve problems related to COVID-19 and its effects in our hospitals here in Western Australia. So we've had kids as young as 12 pitching ideas. So we're going to try and tie that part of that into the discussion that we're going through here today. And Paul, over to you.
Yeah, I believe a lot of what we're going to do today is share stories. It's at the heart of what Kim and I are trying to do in our neighborhood, sharing the stories of successful interactions between reps of higher education, representatives of the workplace, and the learners that are somehow stuck in between, moving from one place to another. The story for me starts really with the idea that we often hear, and it just drives me crazy how often we hear this, the idea that employers look at the people arriving in their workplace that they've just hired and they complain, well, they don't seem well prepared for us. They didn't get what they needed from education. And then we hear learners of all ages saying, oh, I'm in this workplace, but my educational organization didn't prepare me for this. I think, come on, folks, we can do better than that. We have places like the association I'm part of, the Association for Talent Development, which is a global network of trainer, teacher, learners, helping people to keep their lifelong learning skills up to speed so that in the slogan that we use there, we create a world that works better. And I just love that slogan. We can create a world that works better, but we need to be making the connections. And I hope that the group we're pulling together here with Kim, with Jim, and others who make those connections on a day-to-day basis will inspire all of us, A, to work harder at making those connections in a learner-centric way so that lifelong learning pays off. B, gives us the kind of case studies that I know are out there, but we have not been able to document in our own neighborhood. So I'm making the invitation up front, and I'm going to make it again at the end. If you're inspired by this, stay with us, join us in that Slack channel, reach out to us and tell us what we can be doing step by step, small, mid, and large scale, to create the better connections that we all know are possible. We've been doing that through this neighborhood for a couple of years now. This was one of the inceptional ideas through Shaping EDU. So there's a lot of background on this issue. But what we're going to focus on today is Kim taking us into our first case study and then opening this up to discussion of all the things we can be doing together to create something positive as a result of us having sat around the campfire. Kim, you're on.
Right, I'll just bring up the slide set there. And I think you've covered the little bit of background on the neighborhood.
I'm known for that. I don't wait for the slides to come up. So that the slide that we created there was just to show you what the neighborhood looks like. The next slide was to show you the document that came out of the 2019 Shaping EDU unconference in Tempe, where a bunch of issues were highlighted, including this one in a 20-page report. The report is fantastically well done by Samantha Adams Becker. I think, Laura, you were probably involved in that, and the other staff members there at the conference itself. I'm getting a great question now from Tom Hames, riffing off his session from yesterday, where we talked about storytelling and quest. What is our quest here? Our quest is to slay the dragon of non-communication between education and the workplace, where the learner is the elf that's gotten eaten up, or the hobbit getting eaten up before the story even gets going. Thank you, Tom. Kim, back to you.
Yeah. Okay, so I suppose I want to start just to give you a bit of background about an approach that we've adopted here in Western Australia. In 2017, we were looking for a way of trying to connect with our school community. I'm working in a university setting, Curtin University, and we're looking at connecting with our K-12 schools, but also with our industry collaborators as well. We came up with a notion that we've ended up calling the Learning Futures Network, and what we try and do is to have a very informal collaborative structure which allows us to bring together all of our stakeholders with a focus on essentially on the future of work and the future of education and how they're connected. Obviously with some strong sense of what pedagogy should be, with some strong senses about what sorts of things are important in learning. And also, I think from my own background as a teacher, is really bringing a strong sense of experience and engagement to students, so that there's relevance and meaning in what they're doing, as opposed to having this very sort of dry curriculum-led, teacher-led approach to their learning engagement. And so that sort of underpinned the work. We launched the network in July 2017, and it was essentially just me ringing up all my old teacher mates, saying, do you want to join a network? I can promise you an email once a month. And from then, it's grown. We've since grown to, last count was about 240 member organisations in 3 years. And some of those organisations are large national entities. We have the Science and Technology Community across Australia. We have the Science Teachers Association, different professional associations, Questacon. We have government departments. We have community and cultural groups, and we have about 120 of our members are schools across all three sectors: so independent schools, Catholic schools, and the state system. We also have other universities involved. I'm pleased to say that the ASU Learning Futures Collaboratory is one of our members, and becoming one of our more active members, which is great. And we also have universities across Southeast Asia, connections in Europe. Most of our membership's still in Australia, but we've got probably 15% of our membership now is based offshore. And we're looking at keeping that growing and building others and building opportunities, so that all of our students around the world can connect and find opportunities that are relevant to them. What I want to talk about is a couple of ways of working that we've evolved over that time. Sorry, I'm just getting ahead of myself with slides here. The first one I want to talk about is a project that began shortly after the network was formed, and there's a sail training outfit, sail training organisation here in Western Australia called the Lewin. The Lewin is a tall ship, and it sails out of Fremantle Harbour. It takes students on leadership sails. It does day sails. It does all sorts of interesting programs. Being a not-for-profit, they're a little bit hamstrung by their ability to promote themselves, and they were looking for a more engaging way to promote themselves at conferences and at expos and things like that. They connected with a school, which is showing here on the slides, that is John Curtin College of the Arts, and a group of students started working on creating some virtual reality or 360-degree video experiences that give those viewing those experiences a sense of what it's like to be on the ship. Then, as the students discovered, and these are high school students, they were initially 15 years old when they were starting in this particular project, and it became apparent that their technical skills needed to be taken to the next level. So they approached us at the university to see how we could involve. I put them in touch with our visualization laboratory, and sort of they got a little bit of advice about sort of equipment and sort of approaches I should be doing. And then we found a connection with it. We had master's level students in our media culture and social inquiry faculty who were looking for placements as interns. And so we now have this growing sort of web of interactions, where we have the Lewin Ocean Endeavour Foundation. We have the students from our faculty in Media and Creative Arts. We have the students from John Curtin Senior High School. We have other members of the Learning Futures Network, and we have an industry partner called Vortals, which creates some really interesting virtual reality type work, who are supporting the students technically and developing their skills. The principal of Vortals has also got a background in professional film and TV production and all sorts of things as well. So he brings a wealth of experience. What starts to happen here is that everyone's getting a set of needs met. So the students at the high school are meeting all of their course needs. They're learning. They're connecting with industry. They're being identified as potential talent, potential members of a future workforce. Similarly, with our interns coming from the university, they're master's level. They're taking on leadership roles because they're project managing this, but they're also taking on mentorship roles by working with the students. Both sets of students from K-12 and higher ed are working with the industry partner, so they're getting the connections. They're starting to see the bigger picture. They're starting to see where their work and study has relevance in the workplace. And of course, the Lewin is getting a set of resources that they can utilise to promote their work and to promote their organisation. The students from the university have started to scope this project over 5 years, and we now have a 5-year plan. So the first stage was a feet on deck experience, 360-degree video being produced by the high school students. The next phase is to start doing LiDAR and photogrammetry work and modelling the entire vessel inside and out. And that's going to be then tied to maritime studies programs. It'll also be used for safety and orientation programs run by the organisation. So any student who has to come from a remote or regional location to the harbour doesn't necessarily have to do that just for a one-off sort of orientation visit. They can do a lot of that sort of work through virtual reality now. We're also going to take the engines and the generators and expand those out and tie those to the maritime studies, mechanical engineering programs that are operating through our technical colleges nearby as well. So there's a lot of interest in the way that this is operating. So our Chamber of Commerce and Industry now is saying, can we bring other industry partners to this sort of way of working and find new ways of tying this together. So they're looking at talent identification, they're looking at entry-level recruitment processes, and they're looking at workforce development tied to the, I think what we're calling here in Australia, the Industrial Revolution 4.0. So all of those future needs and the shifts that are occurring. So this is one really sort of interesting example of how a broad collaborative approach to working can start to really build those strong links between education and future workforce needs. So I'll just leave that part of the story there for the moment, just see if does anyone have any questions or comments. No?
We can wait you out, everybody. We'd love for you to be jumping in and adding to the story here.
Kim, can you say a little bit about how you made this happen? Because I'll go back to the beginning when somebody had an idea or something, and how did you take it forward?
Okay. There was, I suppose, to begin with, on this particular project, there was a whole lot of coincidence. Is that the students at the John Curtin College of the Arts had the year prior to this project beginning been experimenting with modelling. They're a performing arts college, and so they've just built a new theatre, and so they decided it would be an interesting exercise to start modelling the interior of the theatre. Over the course of a year, the students developed the skills, so they actually ended up creating an entire scale model, navigable model of their theatre in VR. So you can actually go into the space, you can move scenery around, you can push scenery, you can adjust lighting. The VR experience can be sent to directors who can start planning their blocking and staging things. Set designers can use it to start thinking about how they're going to do the set work. Choreographers can start planning dance moves and all sorts of things based on the engagement with the space. So the students already had some fundamental skills in this sort of work at that point, but it was all still just within the school environment. The Lewin the education officer at the Lewin approached the school because there were some collegial connections there. I used to work at the school 20 years ago, so when they needed some technical advice, they knew I was working in the university. They'd already become members of our Learning Futures network. So it was like, can you help us out on this project? And it was just this staggered approach of knowing people, knowing connections, knowing what different skill sets were. It was all about relationships. It was all about people. It wasn't about fancy corporate structures and anything like this. It was just a whole bunch of people who knew each other and had a set of needs that they could define clearly to each other. I absolutely then personal relationships make it happen, and that was the stimulus. That's what got it going initially. Then, as it started to take a bit of the spotlight from outside observers, it then got the connections to broaden the scope, and other organisations and other industries started to say, well, how can we actually then take this as a model of practice and apply it to other contexts? And that's where we're starting to see that there's new ways emerging.
Anybody watching or listening to the archive recording of this down the road is going to be missing some of the stuff that's going in chat. So I'll occasionally call out comments like the one that Jim just put into chat. A key thought here, that based on what Kim said, is personal relationships make it happen. Stay with me a minute here. This is going to seem like an awful non sequitur, but I'm going to drive it right back home to what Kim was saying. A couple of years ago when the shooting happened at Parkland in Florida, and those students, 17 of them, I believe, were killed Valentine's Day 2018. We were looking at a situation there, like so many of the other tragedies in this country, where something happens, we all get incensed, we think we're going to do something, and then we move on to the next tragedy before anything comes out of it. But in this case, because those students had had incredible training and learning experiences in their high school, they knew how to respond to that in the most positive of ways. Some of them were journalism students, and they learned how to use social media tools to tell a story. As the shooting was happening, I believe it was Snapchat that they were using to capture fragments of what was happening and feed that out on the web in a way that had never happened before, a live delivery from the victim's point of view of what they were undergoing. What was even more stunning about that story was within a few days, some key movers that had been in those classrooms got together and said, this can never happen again, never again. And they started planning what to do in response to that, using what they had learned in school and taking it out into a larger environment. You all know how that plays out. 6 weeks later, there were March for Our Lives protests in over 500 places all around the world. That to me is a beautiful example of learning that is directing students to dealing with the world around them without anticipating how they're going to use it. Saying, here are key skills. These were the storytelling skills and the organizational skills that those learners needed to, in many ways, change the world using their social media skills. And I think that's the sort of thing that is at the heart of what we're all going to be talking about and are talking about today. We don't plan every little thing and say, we will teach you this so you can do that. We're looking at a broader thing of saying, here are the skills that allow us to function well in the 21st century. And Kim does great work in that. Our colleague, Jonathan Nalder, with his Future We project, does that in identifying literacies, competencies, and skills to be taken. And I think all of us that are making that gap as trainer teacher learners from our workplaces through the lifelong learning we have and looking back at the academic and informal places of learning, that can create a dynamic, wonderful opportunity for us to make the kind of positive change that I think we're trying to focus here. Jim, I'd love you to jump in, if you don't mind, with a brief description of one or two of those projects that you described to me when we had lunch over a year ago, where you saw people in academia working with people out in the workplace and what's come out of that.
Well, let's see. Can I back up just a minute?
Yes, please.
I want to explain the context for things I share, which is, I was in corporate philanthropy for 14 years. And I would often get people coming from universities to come visit. I was at HP. And if in the first 2 minutes they said, and we'd like some free computers, or we'd like some free, or we're looking for some grants, or in the first 2 minutes, I knew that this collaboration was not going to go anywhere, because at its core is a relationship. A partnership begins with getting to know each other. So I often tell people, never ask for money on your first date. It's not going to go well. You have to get to know each other really well.
That might be why I don't get many dates, Jim.
Yeah, well, perhaps. So let's see. There's so many examples. Paul, is there like one in particular that you
seems to me that you were, when we last spoke, you were right on the verge of documenting a wonderful project that, if I remember correctly, was a statewide coalition, possibly including some community colleges here. And you were looking at something where you brought some students in and they were participating, and that was going to get written up as a report. Is that ringing a bell for you?
Oh, okay. Well, so maybe this is what you were thinking about, was from the work I did for the Cal State University Chancellor's Office, looking at their workforce development programs, specifically asking how could online learning better support their workforce development. And that resulted in, I talked to a lot of people, mostly directors at extension universities and things. A couple of things came out of that report that I think would be interesting. 23 campuses, and most of this work was, now these are not community colleges though, these were Cal State universities, but it was happening mostly out of their extension universities. And I'll have to say, the ones that were doing really well had a really strong, and this has been mentioned before in this conference and in the session, the plenary just before, prior, The ones that did really good at this, that did really well, succeeded in getting students into interesting jobs, blah, 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 had really strong relationships through their workforce development councils, where, you know, the regional businesses were working closely with regional education institutions, and sometimes even all the way down to K-12. One of the ones that stands out to me is Cal State Long Beach, where they, for 20 years now, they've been working closely together, but the partnership was not just bilateral. The people involved were from the university, the local community college, the local K-12 school district, and the workforce development board, and the mayor's office. So that's the, when you get all of those people to the table, then the magic can start happening.
Thank you, Jim. That was, I remember there was that small community college thing. I had forgotten that it was the whole Cal State system. So thanks for really bringing that to the forefront here. What that does for us in this session is it shows, again, what Jim noted earlier, that it's, and Kim said this, it's about the personal relationships. And that is what the foundation that we have in the time we've got here today together in this session, to build on the relationships we have, share out some of the success stories we've had, document that through this recording, which we can post a link to back in our neighborhood on Slack, and decide what we're going to do in the weeks, months, and years ahead of us to not only put this out as an example of what's possible, but to remind people of what Kim and Jim are saying so eloquently here, that it is about building relationships. It is about finding the mutually agreeable things that we are trying to achieve. I'm totally with Jim when I do workshops with colleagues all over the country, especially in libraries, and I ask about how do we build partnerships. First thing I tell them is, don't go in with a wish list and say, we need this many computers or we need this many dollars. Go in and say, we're the library, here's what we do, and then ask what the other group does and look for that overlap of the unmet needs that you're both addressing. That's the starting point for this kind of relationship. So again, unless Kim, is there anything else you wanted to do formally before we really open this up to further discussion?
I've got a couple of little bits and pieces just to sort of continue the story, I suppose.
Let's continue that story, and then be priming the pump here, everybody. Think about the stories you can tell, the things you can bring to the table here in this session that we can walk away with together that are actionable. So Kim, again, back to you.
Yeah, so just sort of taking to the notion that one of the things that this process does too is it starts to take students out of the classroom, and in this case it brings them onto a vessel, onto a ship in a harbour and out on the ocean, on the Indian Ocean. And so the students have actually done a lot of their video recording, a lot of their photography work. They're starting to use drones now to get some external shots and other bits and pieces. So they're building a whole raft of technical skills, but they're also building and bonding with each other and with the representatives of the other various organisations as well. So we're starting to see that people are meeting in new places, meeting in new ways, and that these 15, 16-year-old students are being treated as peers of the adult workers and the adult collaborators that are part of this project as well. So there's some really interesting things there. I mean, there's the kids are getting to use a sextant, for instance, in one of those images there. Strikes me as astounding. Is where you've got this sort of these kids are using some of the most cutting-edge digital technologies available, and then they are going back to things like a sextant in terms of the lived experience of being on the ocean. So there's some great, we've got some great galleries of images developing and that sort of stuff, and we're hoping to take that sort of further. Another project which is similar in structure, slightly different in scope, is that we have another school, Cecil Andrews College, another member of the Learning Futures Network, who again, Vortals is involved with this project as well, helping to document the process. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do through this, is actually documenting and capturing the stories and trying to capture the professional practice stories as well, getting teachers to tell the story of how and why, what's the rationale behind doing, working in this way? How do they make it happen in the classroom? We all hear from teachers constantly saying, oh, it's too hard, the structures are limiting, I don't have the resources, I don't have this. Every one of these projects began basically on the smell of an oily rag and teachers' imagination. So, so we have Western Power in this partnership. Western Power is the primary energy provider across the entire state. We have Isolate, which is a small engineering company that is connected with the school in a range of different ways. And we have Greenbatch, which is a startup company doing plastics recycling with a young engineer running that. So the kids from the high school are going to be working with Greenbatch to recycle plastic material and extrude it into building materials. And then from that, they're going to actually design and build smart outdoor furniture, which will have sensors. So it can do atmospheric sensing. It can determine how many people are standing by. In this current cases, they could actually put proximity sensors to make sure that everyone's doing their proper social distancing, if that was something that we were thinking long term about. It can also provide just a place to plug in and charge your phone or your tablet device, and all operating on solar energy. So Western Power have actually provisioned their renewable energies expert as an advisor on the project. Their entry-level recruitment team from HR is also involved in this, watching through, seeing how can they perhaps offer apprenticeships and ongoing employment and study relationships to the students emerging from the high school environment. Vortals are playing into the mix by providing technical expertise. Isolate brings another engineering dimension to the thing. And again, through the Learning Futures Network and through the connections with the university, we have these options to say, there's all these different pathways when students leave school. We have the technical and vocational pathways. We have the further education pathways, and we have those larger relational pathways that are starting to happen as well. So there's some really quite fascinating projects and possibilities. The last one I want to talk about is the event that we showcased today, where we had at the start of the COVID crisis, a lot of the members of the Learning Futures Network decided that they wanted to do something to contribute, and we'd all been reading about, let's 3D print protective equipment and doing that. So my colleague Tim Robury, who works at one of the schools we've mentioned previously, we thought, well, before we dive into that, because we had 60 odd schools lining up wanting to help out, we thought we'd better contact the health department. So we contacted the bioengineering department at the health department and said, do you actually need any of this PPE produced? I mean, are we the same as the rest of the world? And they said, actually, no, we're not. And there are so many standards and licensing criteria and all sorts of other things that we couldn't possibly take stuff being produced in schools anyway, because the potential for litigation and liability and just that social responsibility is we wouldn't want to have 3D printed a mask for a school kid and then have somebody have it fail and create a life-threatening situation for somebody. So so we started to ask them what we could do. We ended up connecting through the Public Sector Commission, who launched a public crowdsourcing ideas platform called I Think. Now it's used inside the public service. Here, 140,000 staff around the state use it to share and innovate, and they threw it open to the entire population of the state so that every person in the state had an opportunity to contribute ideas to how we might actually combat and deal with COVID. Now, you may be aware that Western Australia has got one of the best responses in the world. We have 16 active cases, all in quarantine in the country. We have 0 community transmission. We're not running around in masks. We have our theatres open, we have our restaurants open, we have our sporting venues open. Our schools are operating in a relatively familiar fashion, actually on a school campus, in a school classroom with teachers and students interacting in the same space. And out of this, we teamed up with Professor Fiona Wood, who happens to be a leading global expert in burn surgery. She's developed a spray on plastic skin, so she's an innovator in her own right. And she took, in the early stages of the COVID lockdown that we were in here, she took her camera, her phone, and took a Zoom journey through 2 of the operating theatres in the hospital where she works. And she showed all the different elements that are at play, and the great innovations that the health department had come up with, which was wrapping plastic bags around equipment to minimise contamination. And so her challenge is, can you find better ways to minimise the contamination from potential airborne aerosol transmission of the virus, to help with sanitation and cleaning processes. And by the way, I'm a burns surgeon, and one of the challenges I face on my regular surgical work without COVID being an issue is that most burns and explosives patients have facial or front side injuries, and I often need to harvest tissue for skin grafts from the rear of the person or from other parts of their body. And currently, particularly with bodies getting larger, with obesity and overweight people being there, it's really hard and it's really dangerous for us to be lifting and moving bodies. It's dangerous for the patient. It puts undue stresses and safety issues on the staff working in the operating theatre. If anyone is interested in trying, could you come up with a way to make it easier for us to move our patients to deal with those sort of things? So within 3 weeks, we had 22 schools who'd put their hand up confirming their participation. They brought 700 students to the pilot who were working in teams and beginning to address some of these problems. Today, we saw 11 of those teams pitching their ideas. We had kids presenting designs where they'd actually created full animated designs using industry standard engineering CAD animation software, showing how they would create like a sandwich type effect on a rotating table for things, how they'd have aerosol misting systems for delivering disinfectants and other things into the spaces. We had one of the students was autistic, and she found it very confronting being on stage, so she presented from backstage with a microphone while her slideshow was presenting, and she probably would have been far more comfortable in a Zoom environment presenting. We had the audience full of industry, government, public sector people, all sorts of other representatives from higher education, from the K-12 system, from the technical colleges. We had members of our innovation festival were there. We had members of the WA Innovation Hub. We had Cisco's Innovation Central. Cisco representative came and saw me after the event. There were 2 of the proposals were using AI to operate things remotely in the theatre. She said, can we next week meet with those students at Innovation Central in the city and start talking about the possibility of taking that forward as a reality, so that Cisco would look at supporting the development of the AI and implementation of that solution. And one of those students was 13 years of age, and she's now being invited to sit at the table with Cisco. So again, these are the sort of things that we're doing. This STEM innovation plays out of a group of projects that we had called we called the Schools Innovation Projects Groups. We had 11 different project groups working around things like VR, drones, designing and making, sustainability, primary industry, agriculture, 11 different groups altogether. And what we're trying to do is capture the professional practice again, provide more and more opportunities for students to work, and tie that in with real meaningful relationships with industry and community and other parts of our society. So that's sort of where we're coming from. That's what we're thinking. There's some really strong benefits from this sort of work. And that's the end of the stories I have. I've got examples here of these unknown characters like Tom Hames commenting on why they think this is such a good idea. Professor David Gibson, who's formerly my line manager, heading back to Vermont as soon as he possibly can to team up with his family. He's retiring. We have the head of our vocational education training program in South Australia. We have another one of my colleagues from University of Maine, Farmington, who worked with Seymour Papert, looking at how this extends all those original ideas of hard fun and challenge and sort of deep critical thinking going into this sort of work. All of the projects feature a couple of things. So there's informal collaboration. None of this happens from having sort of mapped out project plans and contracts and all these things. It actually just comes from a willingness of a group of people wanting to work together. All of our challenges are open-ended. They all emphasize process over solutions. The fact that kids come up with ideas that may not be viable at this stage of the game, but they've promoted thinking in different ways. One group of students with dealing with the burns patients said, well, why can't we take them up into space and use the anti-gravity environment? And everyone went, that would be so silly, so silly. And then suddenly Fiona Wood, the surgeon, said, actually, we haven't even begun to think about anti-grav sort of environments. There may well be possible. And now there's a discussion now about using maglev, so using magnetic levitation that they use for bullet trains and all these sorts of things as a possibility of creating a similar sort of way of moving patients. The design thinking process underlies all of this. We use a range of different design thinking models because we don't want to create a recipe approach to this. It's all authentically based in community and industry needs. We scaffold the process. We've got some digital platforms that we've developed at the university which can help scaffold the engagement. The leadership of these things is distributed across the students, the teachers, the industry partners. Learner development is aligned with curriculum knowledge and skills. So curriculum knowledge isn't the thing that's dragging it all through. Kids are actually getting out there learning and doing, and we're asking teachers to do the mapping backwards to their curriculum. I've already mentioned talent identification, workforce development, entry-level recruitment, but we're also finding that this whole thing just links very, very organically to the national state strategies for STEM and Industry 4.0. and it has the ability to actually bring everybody into the space. It's totally inclusive. The only thing that stops you is your mindset. And Ashley says we have about 15 minutes left. So I think I've finished my storytelling then, and I've got some questions that might lead the next part of the discussion. I'll let Paul address that.
Before we get to the questions, let's do a thing that's more and more we should all be doing in this kind of a setting, which is let's draw the comments that have come into the chat into this conversation and integrate the whole thing. Starting back with conversation from about 5 or 10 minutes ago, Tom was observing, based on the beginning of what you said, Kim, that we are now back to the human over the technology issue rather than putting the technology first. Jim agreed in the chat that that is absolutely the case. Tom added the comment that our job is not upgrading technology, it's upgrading humans. Jennifer Werner added in a question: would it be beneficial for Gen Ed studies to require project management leadership courses to give students that base of organization? Kim, a 1 or 2 line response to that question? Again, would it be beneficial?
I think having students have the opportunities to learn project management and leadership without having to have a course all about it is probably the best way to go. You let them learn it by doing it.
Thanks. And Jim jumped back in with it. He loved the Lewin example because it does something very important. It brings students out into the real world, and it brings the real world to the classroom. When both happen, it can become an extraordinary learning experience. I'm going to pause between each of these, Kim, in case you want to make any kind of response to that.
Oh yeah, no, it's totally the case. It's become wonderful. I mean, we all look forward to those days when we get out on a day sail to take the cameras out, and we just spend a day out on the ocean. It's lovely.
Lisa Coster added reiterated something that I've heard from her before. The college system in Ontario is designed around employee partnerships. Each program has an advisory board made up of industry and corporate partners. PAC also includes students and faculties, much as what we're hearing from what you talked about in the case study that Jim presented for us a little while ago. Tom came back in with a comment that all of the activities in my abstract government course, Tom teaches at a community college in Houston, all the activities in my abstract government course are explicitly designed around skills. They learn information analysis, they learn design, feedback, iteration, and connecting abstract knowledge to concrete action. Learning about government merely provides a framework around those central efforts.
Yep, same here.
Jim said to Lisa, can you tell us more about your industry advisors engaging with students and how it connects to the coursework? So Lisa, you want to come in and add to that right now? Again, responding to Jim's request for how your industry advisors engage with students and how it connects to the coursework?
Sure, no problem. Our PACs are designed, they meet 3 or 4 times a year on a regular basis to look at industry trends, see where the gaps are, see what skills the students should be coming out with, and they help recommend changes or they work with the faculty. There's also students on those boards, so the students are part of that whole process. So they've got the different, the students get to see, hear from industry directly, but we also have industry nights where different from, and they're usually local businesses, and they come in and they talk about, the types of skills needed in order to be successful, or what kinds of jobs might be available for them. And it allows the students to actually have direct access to employers in an environment that's not all revolved around getting a job. It's making the connections, asking the questions, and sometimes that might turn into a job, but that's not the goal. Is just to help the students understand the types of skills they need when they come out. We also work with workforce planning boards that look at their specific. So we work with, say, for instance, Brantford County. They look at what skills are needed in their particular area, and we develop programs that fill that gap. And we usually do that in conjunction with them. So we have a Connect to Skills program that we just worked on a micro-credential for. So students will get some in-class training, but they'll also go out for 2 weeks and work in an industry, and usually they end up getting a job at the end, and they get a credential out of it. So yeah, the one nice thing about the colleges is they're very, very focused on that connection with the workforce. And the last thing I sort of added, we also have a work integrated learning platform that has gone through every single program that we have. And if a student takes a course, there's, project-based learning. Sometimes they're working with industry, or they're working on real life, sort of the way Tom talks about working on real life examples, things that are real skills, or they have internships or co-op, and it tracks all that so that when they come out, they say, oh, you have 1 year's experience working on project management. And so it helps them articulate those skills that they have that they don't even sometimes realize that they have, because they're so focused on, oh, I took this course and that course, and I got this diploma. And so it helps pull those skills out for them.
Jim, do you have a follow-up question for her, or did that pretty much cover it for you?
No, this is great. I love the example that Lisa's talking about.
Fantastic.
Can I make a comment here too? I just, one of the other things I was learning from the project I described was that the folks who were able to stay connected to their alumni did much better. And what I mean by that is, well, let me just be blunt. Do not let the development office own the alumni list, because if it becomes about fundraising, they will scatter. But if it becomes about building authentic, powerful relationships that follow the alumni through all their different career paths, then you've got an amazing network that you build. And one university even went so far as to work with LinkedIn. There's some sort of secret API that allowed them to find where their alumni go. So at any given time, they could easily scrape LinkedIn and find out which industries their alumni landed in, so they could stay in touch and build that network. So anyway.
Jim, you remind me of a wonderful case study in this that I'm personally involved in. I'm not going to out anybody here, but I'm going to say I went to a lovely university and wanted to stay in touch and support the university afterwards. As you've suggested, putting the alumni tracking and alumni cultivation process into their development office kind of killed my interest. For a while there was one person on campus that would check in with me every few months to see what I was doing, and would put that into an alumni newsletter so that I was reconnecting with people. But when she moved on, all of a sudden, all I got was hits for money. And when I would reach out and offer to do stuff, I was always getting a response of, here's a request for more money. And that's, at least temporarily, it's killed my relationship with that university. I hope somebody moves that out of alumni development at some point and does exactly what you said. It's a real cautionary story for all of us that are looking at this and what we can do. Clearly, we're not going to get through all the comments here. I'm just going to read a couple more, and then I want next to have Karina back on to show us what she's drawn so far. Karina, go ahead and put that up while I'm reading these comments, and that'll prime the pump for a few last comments that are action-oriented so we can decide what we're going to do together. But one comment I saw here in chat was from Arlene Krebs. Some essentials to consider. Public speaking. I can't even do what I'm trying to read here. Public speaking skills. I can do this. Writing skills, critical thinking skills, especially in this age of online disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, human skills, empathy, collaboration. Tom jumped in with don't forget visual skills, and she said, yeah, of course, and listening skills, deep listening. Mike Kyle said that he comes from a corporate world and entertainment industry. We've created a school focused around communication and life and workforce skills. My relationship in business has been critical in steering both curriculum and particular skill sets we focus on. There's a very rich chat transcript there, and I understand that we'll get a copy of that. Once we have that, we can edit it a little bit. We'll post that as a resource on that Slack document to keep this conversation going. Let's move into the final part of this with Karina, you starting by talking about what you've seen, and let's as a group say what simple actions we can take in the next week or two to keep this going and move us closer to a world in which everybody involved in this picture is communicating and working together for positive change. Karina?
Thanks, Paul, and everyone who's participated verbally and textually in the chat. I love these stories from the Learning Futures Network and some of these other anecdotes that we're hearing in the chat. I think that one of the themes that I'm picking up not only from this session, but all of Learning Human, and it's in the name, is the human aspect of all of this and using tech as a tool to enable relationship building. And while I've got the soapbox, that's really something that I think many organizers of events miss using Zoom but Learning Human has really nailed is that it's not just about content delivery. This is about relationship building. So helping students develop and understand skills that are imperative not only for their classes, for grades, but for the real world, quote, and also to help them develop and hone skills that we don't necessarily know how they might be used, because the future is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen, and helping them develop skills to build relationships, to work together, to communicate. It can be really important and be used in ways that we can't even imagine. So,
Karina, I'm still, at least from where I'm sitting, I'm seeing myself on the video. Can you share your illustration that you're doing? Do you have that ability?
So it should be spotlighted. I think Ash spotlighted me. So
So it's up on the screen for others to see.
Yeah, if you cannot see it, okay, I'm seeing, maybe we need to add a global icon to the diagram. What do you mean by that, Raj?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just meant that, the industry and education, it's not just in the US, but, the alumni move on. And I thought, I didn't see in the diagram, but I thought that if, some representation is there, then this can be open worldwide. So it just adds another dimension to that.
Thank you. Thank you for helping with the context there.
Yeah,
okay, with 3 minutes to go, in the chat, or if people want to jump in audibly, one line, what will you do in the next week to propel us closer to a world where people in lifelong learning and the learners themselves and the workplace are better connected so we all benefit? Okay, anybody else? All right, I'm hoping this means that, please.
Sorry. Okay, let me turn my camera back on. I'll jump in. So one thing that I feel like I need to do is I've seen this theme throughout the whole week. And just for myself, because I like visuals, I like having things up in front of me, I want to pull all those pieces together and see what through lines I see. And I also feel like there are a lot of relationships that have been started this week that that I should tend, that need a little cultivation, need a little love to keep the conversation going.
That is the challenge that I think every one of us as mayors and Shaping EDU has had. We come to these wonderful meetings, we have great conversations. I can't tell you the number of times Lisa and I have had conversations about what are we going to do next, and then we end up continuing that in the next session like we're having today. So that commitment that we saw earlier in the plenary session of getting on that list, sharing out our contact information, and more importantly, getting into that Slack channel and communicating with whatever tools we have, I think we can do something, but it is going to take us all being a little more interactive than we've been and a little more dedicated to making the changes. We can do this together. Anyone else?
Yeah, this has come as close to, for me, as coming together within a conference. We've got plenary sessions, we've got keynotes, but we also have a lot of the informal connections. And to the point, the larger point being made, partnerships really are collaborations, and they're fostering of friendships and deeper impact. It may be something that doesn't immediately benefit either, other than just it enriches our conversation and our thinking. It hones our efforts. It has allies. We're able to open up paths together. And if they develop into something that is represented in, say, a solicitation response, or a collaborative writing effort, or just chatting around the campfire, I think all of those are possible. It feels like this venue is now expanding on what it means to be virtual. And again, virtual is real to me.
Completely agree with you, Barnaby. I just stayed up late last night writing what I called my third letter from camp.
I loved it,
Putting
Paul.
on my blog. talking about how this conference has just made this whole community feel like it's maturing and evolving at a very rapid rate. For a long, long time, all of us who've been together over a long period of time have talked about ed tech and making people at the center of it, and looking at education. And our plenary keynote speakers this week have brought this to the larger social justice setting. I think is well worth pursuing. So I'm going to turn this back to Kim for any last minute comments he has. Heartfelt thanks for all the time you're putting into this. Hope we do remain smart enough to stay in touch and to do what we can to make change. Kim, you want to bring it home?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of the comments that we've just heard start to sum up the strengths of the particular model that I used as an example. But I think that global picture, that larger sense of how these things can start to play out, they start to shift our mindset. Once that mindset starts to shift, once our vision starts to become different of what's possible, we start to see new opportunities arising. And I think that's one of the key things, is that our mindsets often close off possibilities. It's one of the things we teach with the design thinking process is you don't throw any ideas away until somebody has shown you the evidence that it's not a good idea. But you keep it there and you fight for that idea as long as you possibly can. And it's something we sort of instill into the kids, is that you don't discard an idea easily. And that's a sort of a two-pronged sword, because teachers get into their head very often that they have a particular way that they have to work in their system, and it's not until they're shown new ways that they really start to take things forward and provide new opportunities for their students. And that's really where I come from. Is my interest is in the students and their experiences and where they're going to take the world, because these kids are going to be looking after us soon enough.
Lisa's brought back in a private message to me via chat the idea that Kim and I and Jonathan and I used to talk about, which is staying in touch and maybe do a monthly chat session to move things forward. I firmly believe that's a great way to go. If you're in and interested, get your name into that Slack channel that Jim had highlighted. I believe it's called Edu Workforce in our Slack channel. And let's keep up with each other and set that up within the next month so we really move this. I believe we're out of time. The next group is going to need to get in here and set things up. So thank you. See you back in the mess hall.
Thank you all. Take care. And Paul, I'm actually not going to do much else tonight. I'm going to go to sleep now.
I can't blame you, Kim. Thank you so much for being up in the middle of your night to add so much to this conversation.
Good night all. Take care.
Good night.